My stepmother tried to erase me from my father's will, so I proved she was never his wife. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and expired hope. I sat across from my stepmother, Helena, her designer suit immaculate, her smile victorious. She had just presented a will that cut me out completely, leaving everything to her. My father had been dead for only 3 weeks, and she was already erasing my existence from his life. The will looked legitimate. The signatures looked authentic. But something felt wrong. My father had promised me he would never leave me with nothing. He had always been a man of his word. I spent the next 6 months digging into Helena's past, hiring private investigators and forensic document examiners, and what I found was more shocking than I could have imagined. Helena was never legally married to my father. Their marriage certificate was forged. She had manipulated him, lied to him, and built her entire life on a foundation of fraud. I was about to take everything away from her, just as she had tried to take everything from me. I was 12 years old when my mother died. She had been sick for a long time, cancer that had spread too far too fast. My father, Arthur, was devastated. He had loved my mother with a depth that I didn't fully understand until I was older. For 2 years, he was a shell of himself, going through the motions of life but never truly present. Then he met Helena. She was a real estate agent who had shown him a property he was thinking of purchasing. She was beautiful, confident, and relentlessly charming. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married. I was 15 and resentful. No one could replace my mother, and I made sure Helena knew it. Helena, to her credit, tried at first. She cooked dinners I refused to eat. She offered to help with my homework, which I rejected. She tried to bond with me over shopping trips and spa days, but I was too consumed by grief and anger to accept her. I saw her as an intruder, a woman who had taken my mother's place in my father's heart. Looking back, I can see that my behavior was immature and unfair. But I was a child who had lost her mother, and I didn't know how to process that pain. Helena eventually stopped trying. She withdrew, and the distance between us grew into a chasm that would never be crossed. My father, caught between his grieving daughter and his new wife, tried to keep the peace. He was a good man, a kind man, but he was also a peacekeeper who avoided conflict at all costs. He never pushed me to accept Helena, and he never pushed Helena to try harder. Instead, he created a fragile equilibrium, a household where we coexisted but never truly connected. I went to college, graduated, and built a life for myself in a different city. I visited my father when I could, but the visits were always strained. Helena was always there, a permanent fixture in his life that I had learned to tolerate but never love. My father and I maintained a close relationship despite the distance. We spoke on the phone every week, sometimes for hours. He would tell me about his work, his hobbies, his health. I would tell him about my career, my friendships, my dreams. He was proud of me, I could tell. He would brag about me to his friends, my achievements a source of quiet joy for him, and he always made sure to remind me that I was his daughter, his only child, his legacy. "You're all I have," he would say. "Everything I've built is for you." I believed him. I never had any reason to doubt him. When my father was diagnosed with a rare heart condition, I was devastated. He was 72, still active and vibrant. The doctors were optimistic, but the treatment was aggressive and the prognosis uncertain. I flew home to be with him, spending weeks at his bedside in the hospital. Helena was there too, always present, always attentive. I had to admit that she was a good caretaker. She managed his medications, communicated with his doctors, and kept the house running. For the first time, I felt a grudging respect for her. She had been with my father for over 20 years, and she had been loyal. I didn't love her, but I no longer hated her. My father's health declined slowly over the next 2 years. He was in and out of the hospital, his body weakening with each passing month. I visited as often as I could, but I lived across the country, and my job made it difficult to take extended time off. Helena kept me updated, sending me daily emails about his condition. I was grateful for her communication, even if it always felt slightly clinical. She never offered emotional support, never asked how I was coping, but I didn't expect it. We had never been that kind of family. 3 months before his death, my father called me. His voice was weak but determined. "I need to talk to you about the will," he said. "I want you to know that everything is taken care of. The house, the investments, the insurance, it's all for you. Helena has her own money, her own retirement. I've made sure that you're protected." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, not because I cared about the money, but because I knew my father was thinking of me. He was making sure I would be okay. I told him I loved him and that I would see him soon. I never got the chance. He died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. I was devastated, consumed by grief and regret. I should have visited more. I should have called more. I should have been there. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences, Helena at the center of it all, the grieving widow receiving endless sympathy. I stood on the periphery, feeling like an outsider in my own family. After the service, Helena approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to meet with the lawyer," she said. There are some things we need to discuss. The meeting was scheduled for a week later. I sat in the lawyer's office, my hands trembling, my heart racing. Helena sat across from me, composed and confident. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, unfolded the will and began to read. I listened as he detailed the distribution of assets, the house, the investments, the insurance. All of it was left to Helena. I was mentioned once. A single line that read, "I make no provision for my daughter, as she is well provided for in her own life." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I looked at Helena, my eyes wide with disbelief. She smiled back at me, a cold, calculated smile. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this must be difficult for you, but your father made his decision. He wanted me to have everything." "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "He told me the will was different. He told me I was protected. He was confused," Helena replied, shrugging. "The illness affected his mind. He didn't know what he was saying." I left the meeting in a daze. I couldn't believe what had happened. My father had promised me. He had never broken a promise in his life. I spent the next week in a fog, going through the motions of grief while trying to process the betrayal. Then something occurred to me. My father had been meticulous about documents. He kept copies of everything. Somewhere in his house, there had to be a copy of the original will. I decided to search his study, the room where he had spent most of his time in his final years. The study was exactly as he had left it. His books were on the shelves, his papers were in the drawers, his desk was covered in notes and files. I started searching, methodically going through every drawer, every folder, every box. And then I found it. A manila envelope tucked behind a row of law books, hidden from plain sight. Inside was a copy of the will, dated 6 months before the official one. It was written in my father's handwriting, clear and precise. It left the house to me, the investments to me, the insurance to me. It left Helena a generous sum, but not the majority. It was exactly what my father had promised me. I also found something else, a folder labeled marriage license. I opened it, expecting to find a copy of the document. Instead, I found a letter from a private investigator, dated 5 years earlier. My father had hired someone to look into Helena's background. The letter detailed inconsistencies in her immigration records, her employment history, and her previous marriage. It also noted that her marriage to my father had never been properly registered with the county. She had forged the documents to make it look like they were legally married, but the county had no record of their union. My father had been investigating Helena before he died. He had suspected her of fraud. I felt a cold fury wash over me. Helena had been manipulating my father for years. She had forged the will, forged the marriage certificate, and stolen everything that was rightfully mine. But I also felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had the evidence. I had proof that she had committed fraud, and I was going to use it to destroy her. I hired my own private investigator, a woman named Diane who specialized in financial fraud. Together, we built a case against Helena. We gathered evidence of the forged marriage certificate, the forged will, and her attempts to cover her tracks. We discovered that she had been siphoning money from my father's accounts for years, transferring funds to offshore accounts that he didn't know about. She had been planning this for a long time. She was a con artist, and my father had been her mark. I didn't confront her directly. I knew she would deny everything, try to spin the story, make me look like a bitter, vengeful daughter. Instead, I filed a lawsuit against her, challenging the will and her legal status as my father's wife. The case was set to go to trial 6 months after my father's death. It was a long, agonizing wait. I spent the months preparing, gathering witnesses, building my case. I wanted to make sure that when I finally faced Helena in court, I had everything I needed to win. The night before the trial, I stood in my father's study looking at his photograph. "I'm going to make this right," I whispered. "I'm going to expose her. I'm going to honor your memory." I felt his presence in the room, his approval, his love. I knew I was doing the right thing. Helena had taken advantage of a grieving man, manipulated him, and stolen his legacy. She didn't deserve to get away with it, and I was going to make sure she didn't. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers filled the benches, their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands steady, my heart calm. Across from me, Helena sat with her lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who looked confident but nervous. I knew he had good reason to be nervous. I had the evidence. I had the proof. And I was about to expose Helena for exactly what she was: a fraud, a liar, and a thief. The trial began with opening statements. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Victoria, laid out the case with precision and clarity. She detailed the forged will, the forged marriage certificate, and the years of financial manipulation. She presented my father as a loving father who had been deceived and exploited by a woman he trusted. Helena's lawyer countered with a defense that was predictable and weak. He claimed that my father had been of sound mind when he changed the will, that he had chosen to leave everything to his devoted wife. He accused me of being a bitter, estranged daughter who was trying to steal what wasn't rightfully mine. The first witness was the handwriting expert. He testified that the signatures on the new will were not my father's. He pointed to subtle inconsistencies in the loops and curves, evidence that the signatures had been traced or copied. He was confident, professional, and impossible to dispute. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of shock. Helena's face remained impassive, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. The second witness was the county clerk. She testified that the marriage certificate submitted by Helena was not on file. It was a forgery, a document that had been created to give the illusion of a legal marriage. She explained that without a valid marriage certificate, Helena had no legal standing as my father's wife. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Helena's lawyer looked panicked. He asked for a recess, but the judge denied it. The third witness was the private investigator, Diane. She detailed the offshore accounts, the years of financial fraud, and the trail of evidence that led directly to Helena. She presented bank statements, wire transfers, and emails that showed Helena had been systematically stealing from my father. She had taken millions of dollars over the years, hiding the money in accounts that my father knew nothing about. The evidence was damning. Helena was exposed as a greedy, manipulative woman who had married my father for his money and nothing else. The final witness was me. I took the stand and told the story of my father, the man I had loved and admired. I talked about our phone calls, his promises, his love for me. I talked about the night before his death, when he had reassured me that I was protected. I talked about my grief, my confusion, and my determination to honor his memory. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I was calm and composed, my words carrying the weight of truth. The jury listened intently, their faces reflecting a mixture of sympathy and outrage. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Helena's lawyer had no questions for me. He knew there was nothing he could say to undermine my testimony. The judge looked at the jury and instructed them to begin their deliberations. They were gone for only 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. They found that the will was invalid, that the marriage was invalid, and that Helena had committed fraud. My father's estate was awarded to me, and Helena was ordered to repay every cent she had stolen. Helena sat in her chair, her face pale, her hands gripping the table. She looked like she had aged 20 years in a single day. I met her eyes, and for a moment I felt a flicker of pity. She had built her life on a foundation of lies, and now those lies had crumbled around her. But the pity was short-lived. She had tried to destroy me. She had tried to erase my father's memory. She deserved everything that was coming to her. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Helena was arrested for fraud and forgery, charged with multiple felonies. The court case was covered extensively in the media, her face plastered across newspapers and television screens. She was publicly disgraced, a cautionary tale of greed and deception. The house was sold, the investments liquidated, the accounts frozen. I took control of my inheritance, just as my father had intended. But the victory felt hollow. I had won the case, but I had lost so much. My father was gone. My relationship with Helena, dysfunctional as it was over. I was alone, standing at the center of a legal victory that felt more like a funeral. I spent the next few months grieving, processing the loss of my father and the betrayal of the woman who had been his wife. I started therapy, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It was a slow, painful process, but I was determined to heal. I also decided to honor my father's legacy in a way that truly mattered. He had been a generous man, a philanthropist who believed in giving back. I established a scholarship in his name, a fund that would support young women who had lost a parent and were struggling to afford college. It was a small gesture, but it felt meaningful. It was a way to keep his memory alive, to ensure that his kindness and generosity lived on. The case made me think about forgiveness. I was angry at Helena for a long time. I wanted her to suffer, to pay for what she had done. But eventually, I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. I wrote Helena a letter, not to forgive her, but to release myself. I told her that I understood her desperation, her fear of being alone. I told her that I hoped she would find peace, even if she didn't deserve it. I sent the letter and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was finally free. A year after the trial, I received a letter from Helena. She was in prison, serving her sentence. She apologized genuinely for what she had done. She said she had been consumed by greed and fear, that she had convinced herself that she deserved everything. She said she was sorry for hurting my father, for hurting me. I read the letter and felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no forgiveness. Just a quiet acceptance that her story was no longer my story. I eventually moved to a new city, a fresh start, a new beginning. I bought a small apartment, decorated it with my father's favorite artwork, and started building a life that was entirely my own. I made new friends, explored new hobbies, and opened myself up to the possibility of love. I met a man named Leo, a kind, patient teacher who understood my grief and accepted my past. He didn't try to fix me or save me. He just loved me exactly as I was. The scholarship grew, helping dozens of young women pursue their dreams. I received letters from them, each one a testament to my father's legacy and my own resilience. I was proud of what I had built, proud of how far I had come. I had faced the worst that life could throw at me, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Today, I am at peace. I think about my father often, remembering his laughter, his wisdom, his love. I know he would be proud of me. I know he would be happy that I fought for what was right, that I honored his memory, that I found happiness again. He had always wanted that for me. He had always believed in me. The road to healing had been long and winding, filled with setbacks and challenges. But I had made it. I had climbed out of the darkness and into the light. I had reclaimed my inheritance, my identity, and my future. And I had proven that even the deepest betrayal could be transformed into the greatest triumph. I raised my glass to the sunset, just as I had done so many times before. To my father, to his memory, to the beautiful, resilient, unbreakable woman I had become.